She thought she was planning someone else's love story. She chose the flowers. She chose the golden hour over the Brooklyn skyline. She chose the music that would make a room full of strangers feel like they were witnessing something sacred. Every single detail, curated, deliberate, breathtaking. She had no idea the man who hired her had already written her name somewhere in his plans. Long before she ever walked into that meeting room. Long before she ever shook his hand. And the most terrifying part? She was falling. Slowly. Quietly. Completely. And she didn't even know it yet. Stay with me. Because this story, is going to change the way you think about love forever. Her name was Ida Monroe. And if Manhattan had a heartbeat, Ida moved in perfect rhythm with it. Fast, focused, and too busy to feel anything she hadn't scheduled in advance. 12 years. That's how long she had been building Monroe Events from a one-woman operation into the most whispered name in New York's wedding industry. Not the loudest. The most whispered. Because the best things in this city never need to announce themselves. Her Midtown office looked like the inside of a beautiful mind. Mood boards pinned with surgical intention. Fabric swatches laid out like a painter's palette. And on the corner of her desk, always, a single white peony in a clear glass vase. Because details mattered to Ida. They always had. She was the kind of woman who arrived at appointments 2 minutes early and noticed when anyone else didn't. The kind of woman who could look at a flower arrangement and tell you exactly what emotion it was missing. The kind of woman who had mapped out her professional life with the same precision she brought to every client's wedding. Her personal life? That was another story. One she had quietly stopped writing. The contract. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped between a catering invoice and a florist confirmation like it was just ordinary mail. Cream-colored paper. No return address. The kind of stationery that cost more than most people's dinners. Inside, a single typed page, and a number that made Ida blink. Twice. Plan the most breathtaking wedding Manhattan has ever seen. Budget. Unlimited. Timeline. Flexible. Details to follow. No bride's name. No groom listed. Just a wire confirmation for a retainer that could cover 6 months of her firm's operating costs, already deposited. She read it 3 times. Then she called her assistant. Maya. Did you know about this contract? Maya's voice carried that tone, half amusement, half conspiracy. The meeting is already scheduled. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Your office. Ida set the paper down slowly. In 12 years, she had never accepted a contract without a full client profile. She had rules. Systems. Boundaries. Because she understood better than anyone that weddings were emotional landmines wrapped in tulle and good intentions. You needed to know people to do this right. She picked up the contract again. Ran her thumb along its edge. She said yes before she fully understood why. He arrives. He arrived at 8:58. Ida noticed the time because she was the kind of person who noticed things like that. 2 minutes early. Its own kind of statement. The glass door of Monroe Events opened, and Bennett Calloway walked in like a man who had decided, long before entering any room, exactly how much space he intended to take up in it. The answer, apparently, was all of it. Charcoal suit. No tie. The top button of his white shirt open in a way that looked effortless and almost certainly wasn't. His watch caught the morning light as he extended his hand, not flashy, but precise. The kind of detail that told you more about a person than anything they might choose to say. Mr. Calloway. Ida kept her voice level, professional. The handshake was brief. Firm. She let go first. Ms. Monroe. His voice was low, unhurried, with a slight curve at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, and wasn't quite not one either. Dark eyes that moved across her office once, slowly, deliberately, before settling back on her with an attention that felt uncomfortably like being read. She gestured to the chairs across from her desk and opened her portfolio. I'll be honest with you, she said, clicking her pen. I don't typically accept anonymous contracts. I made an exception this time, which means I'll need full transparency going forward. Bride's name, your relationship, timeline, aesthetic preferences, non-negotiables. Of course. He leaned back in the chair, relaxed in a way that somehow made the room feel like his office and not hers. I'll give you everything you need. She studied him across the clean surface of her desk. Something about the way he'd said that, everything you need, landed differently than it should have. She filed the sensation under irrelevant and moved on. The budget, she said, tapping the contract, is extraordinary. I want to make sure we use it with intention. Not excess. A wedding should feel like the couple, not like a performance. For the first time, something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of something genuine, quickly composed. But she caught it. That's exactly what I want, he said quietly. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Bennett Calloway answered every logistical question with patience, and deflected every personal one with a precision that should have frustrated her more than it did. When he finally stood to leave, adjusting the cuff of his jacket, he paused at the door. You have a peony on your desk, he said, almost to himself. Aida glanced at the flower. I do. He turned. That almost smile again. Good to know. The door closed behind him with a soft, definitive click. Aida sat still for a moment, her pen hovering over a blank page in her notebook. The office smelled faintly of his cologne, something warm and quiet. Cedar. And something else she couldn't name. She told herself the slight acceleration in her pulse was simply the unusual nature of the contract. She told herself that twice more on the subway home. What she didn't know yet, what she couldn't possibly know, was that her name had already been written somewhere in his plans. And had been for far longer than one meeting. The second meeting. The second meeting was supposed to be about flowers. That was it. Nothing complicated. Nothing emotionally charged. Just swatches, catalogues, and the kind of clean professional conversation Aida Monroe could navigate in her sleep. She had done this exact meeting 47 times in her career. She even wore her most businesslike outfit. A deep burgundy blazer. Tailored black trousers. Heels that clicked against the marble floor with the kind of authority that reminded her, on difficult days, exactly who she was. A woman who had built something real from nothing. A woman who did not get distracted. Bennett arrived at 9:02, 4 minutes later than last time. She noticed. She noticed, too, the navy jacket. No tie. Again. She was already beginning to recognize that detail as intentional rather than careless. He was carrying 2 coffees. From the place 3 blocks east, the one with the green awning that nobody found unless they already knew where to look. He set one in front of her without asking. She looked at the cup. Then at him. Oat milk. 1 sugar, he said simply, settling into the chair like he owned it. Lucky guess. It wasn't a lucky guess. It was exactly right. And Aida Monroe, who prided herself on being the most unreadable person in any room, felt something small and inconvenient move through her chest. Thank you, she said carefully, and opened the catalogue. The flowers that knew too much. She walked him through the classic options first. Garden roses in ivory and blush. Cascading orchids. Structured white calla lilies. Each one elegant. Each one a safe and beautiful answer to the question of what a Manhattan wedding should look like. Bennett listened. He looked at every board with genuine attention, slowly, rather than scanning impatiently. But he didn't reach for anything. Didn't lean in. None of these, she asked when the silence stretched a beat too long. They're beautiful, he said. But they're not right. Aida pulled out the secondary catalogue. The one she kept for clients who surprised her. Less conventional. More emotional, flowers chosen for meaning rather than just visual elegance. She was reaching for a ranunculus sample when Bennett's hand moved first. He pointed, not casually, not randomly, directly at a photograph near the bottom right corner of the board. White peonies. Full and slightly overblown. Clustered alongside golden ranunculus in an arrangement that felt wildly romantic and somehow completely undesigned. Like something that had simply grown that way. Aida went very still. That combination, that exact pairing, existed in precisely one place in the world. A pencil sketch in the back of the worn leather notebook she carried everywhere. A page she had filled 3 years ago on a quiet Sunday. Designing the wedding she had stopped letting herself imagine. The one that lived only there. Private. Untouched. Never shown to a single person. That one, Bennett said, with the calm certainty of someone pointing at something obvious. The air in the room changed temperature. How did you? She stopped herself. What made you choose that arrangement? He looked up at her. Something in his expression was careful in a way it hadn't been before. Still composed. Still maddeningly unhurried. But aware, like a man who knew exactly what he'd just done, and had decided to let it breathe rather than explain it away. Instinct, he said. One word. Perfectly placed. Aida held his gaze for 1 second longer than was professionally advisable. Instinct, she repeated, in a tone that made it clear she did not find that sufficient. The corner of his mouth moved. Sometimes the right thing just announces itself. She wrote white peonies, golden ranunculus in her notebook, on a professional page, nothing like that private sketch, and moved forward. Because moving forward was what she did. But her pulse was doing something she didn't appreciate. The third meeting that never ended. The third meeting had a scheduled end time. Aida had written it herself, in the deliberate no-nonsense way she handled everything that needed boundaries. Bennett Calloway, venue music consultation. Tuesday. 2:30 p.m. 30 minutes. 30 minutes was professional. 30 minutes was safe. At 4:17, her assistant sent a single text from the front desk. Should I cancel your 4:30? Aida looked at the message. Then she looked at Bennett, who was in the middle of explaining, with complete sincerity and zero apparent awareness of the time, why he believed the first song at a reception set the emotional tone for the entire marriage. She typed back, yes. She did not examine why. It had started reasonably enough. No classical music, Bennett had said immediately. It distances people. Makes them feel like guests at someone else's moment instead of witnesses to their own. Aida had paused at that. It was an unexpectedly precise observation. Most grooms arrived with a playlist their fiancé had forwarded and a vague desire not to embarrass themselves on the dance floor. They did not arrive with theories. What do you want people to feel? She asked. He looked out the window for a long moment, watching Manhattan do its relentless afternoon thing. Like time slowed down, he said finally. Just for that hour. Like the rest of the world agreed to wait. The room was very quiet. Aida wrote it down, not because she needed to, but because writing kept her hands busy and her expression neutral. What followed was 30 minutes that became 90 without either of them acknowledging the progression. They moved from music into lighting. How sound and warmth worked together to create emotional memory. How the wrong temperature of white could flatten a room that should have glowed. The best moments at weddings are almost never the planned ones, he said at some point, after 3 o'clock. They were at the window by then. She didn't quite remember how they'd migrated from the table, watching the afternoon light shift from sharp to golden. You plan weddings, he continued, turning to look at her rather than the city. But you believe in the unplanned parts. It wasn't a question. I believe in both, she said carefully. The structure holds the space. But the feeling has to be real. And if the feeling arrives before the structure is ready for it? The question landed somewhere specific. She felt exactly where. Then you adjust the structure, she said, after a beat. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He smiled at that, a real one, this time. Not the half-suggestion she had catalogued from the previous meetings. It transformed his face entirely. Something warmer underneath all that composure. Something that made him look briefly like a person who laughed easily and often when no one was watching him from a professional distance. She looked back at the window. He mentioned the future wife once, around 4 o'clock. Casually. The way someone drops a detail that is technically informative and practically evasive. She'll love whatever you choose, he said about the cocktail hour playlist. She trusts the process completely. That's an unusual amount of confidence. I know her well. What does she like musically? A pause. The particular kind a very intelligent person uses when they are selecting rather than searching for an answer. Songs that feel like a memory, he said finally. Even the first time you hear them. Aida stared at her notebook. She had written almost that exact phrase in her personal journal 2 years ago, trying to describe the kind of music that made her chest ache for no reason she could explain. She didn't say that. On the sidewalk outside, the late afternoon air hit them both. Cold and clean. They were standing closer than the width of the doorway required. Neither moved to correct it. Same time Thursday, he asked. I'll have Maya confirm, she said. Her calendar already had Thursday blocked. She hadn't blocked it for him. She told herself that all the way back to her desk. And almost, believed it. The botanical garden. The venue walkthrough was never supposed to be personal. It was a site assessment. Purely logistical. Aida had her camera, her measuring tape, her checklist refined over a decade of doing this work. She had even worn comfortable shoes, because she was a woman who had learned, painfully and exactly once, never to wear heels to an outdoor walkthrough. She was prepared. She was always prepared. What she was not prepared for was the rain. It arrived the way New York rain always did, without negotiation, without apology, and with the specific cruelty of soaking through a blazer before the mind had time to process the inconvenience. Aida grabbed her notebook first. Professional instinct. Bennett, who had been examining the pergola archway with the focused attention he brought to everything, shrugged out of his jacket in one motion and held it over her head before she had time to object. I'm fine, she said immediately. You're holding a notebook over your face, he said. You're not fine. They ran. The nearest shelter was a small covered pavilion at the garden's eastern edge. A green roof structure with wooden benches and a view of the rose garden drowning quietly in the downpour. A vendor cart nearby was still optimistically open. They bought 2 coffees without making eye contact or conversation with the man in the yellow rain poncho, and it felt, somehow, exactly right. Saturday. The rain accelerated. The Wi-Fi on Aida's phone showed 1 bar. Then, with the particular cruelty of New York infrastructure, none. Bennett looked at his own dead screen. Set it face down on the bench beside him with the unhurried acceptance of a man who had made peace with things he couldn't control. We wait, he said simply. It was the quiet that did it. Not uncomfortable. That was the thing she couldn't reconcile afterward. It should have been awkward, 2 people with a professional arrangement, stranded in a garden pavilion with cooling coffee and no agenda. Instead, it settled around them like something that had been waiting for the right conditions to exist. He spoke first. Not about the wedding. About a summer he'd spent in Florence at 23. How he'd walked into a small church on a side street, heard a single cello echoing off the stone walls, and stood completely still for 20 minutes. Unable to explain why he couldn't leave. I didn't know Italian, he said. I didn't know anything about the music. But I knew I was supposed to be there. Aida was looking at the rain. What did it feel like? Like coming home to a place you've never been. She turned to look at him. And something in the way he was already looking at her made her understand, with a slow, certain clarity that traveled from her chest outward, that he hadn't been talking about Florence. Bennett, she said quietly. Aida. Who is she? A long pause. The rain softened slightly, the way it sometimes does just before it stops entirely. There is no bride, he said. The words arrived without drama. Carefully. Like something he had been carrying for a long time and had finally set down. There's no wedding. There never was. I needed a reason to walk into your office. I needed time. He stopped. Began again. I've known your work for 3 years. I've sat in the back of 2 weddings you planned because I wanted to understand what kind of person could make a room feel like that. And every time I tried to simply introduce myself, He paused. I couldn't find a version of it that wasn't just a stranger telling you that you'd changed the way he thought about everything important. Aida said nothing. The peony, he continued, and his voice was lower now, steadier in the way things become steady when the truth is finally being carried by them. The flowers. The music that feels like a memory. I didn't guess those things, Aida. I've been paying attention to you. I know that makes me either the most sincere person you've ever met, or the most alarming one? I haven't decided yet, she said. But she was smiling. Barely. The way sunlight moves through a curtain before you think to open it. I booked one more meeting, he said. After today. I was going to tell you then. But then it rained. It rained, she repeated softly. And you grabbed your notebook first. She laughed, unexpectedly, genuinely, and the sound of it surprised them both. The rain had stopped. The rose garden dripped quietly in the grey afternoon light. Somewhere nearby, a bird made a single sound, as if testing whether the world was ready. Ida Munro sat in a covered pavilion in the botanical garden on a Wednesday that was supposed to be about measuring archways, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, completely unprepared. It felt extraordinary. I have questions, she said. I have time, he said. And it began. Not with flowers or contracts or carefully curated playlists. It began the way the best things always do, in the space between what was planned and what simply arrived. The wedding. 1 year later. The flowers were white peonies and golden ranunculus. The music made time slow down, just for that hour, just the way he had always said it should. The golden light over Brooklyn at sunset fell exactly where Aida had always imagined it would. She had imagined it, after all. In a pencil sketch. In the back of a worn leather notebook. In the private, untouched corner of herself she had stopped showing to anyone. She wore ivory. She held peonies. And the man waiting for her at the end of the aisle was the one who had already known, long before she did, that she had been planning her own wedding all along.
Outro. Call to action.
If this story reached something inside you, if it found the part of you that still believes in love that is quiet and certain and pays attention, then you already know why we tell stories like this. Because love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as a cup of coffee, ordered exactly right. A flower you never showed anyone. A sentence that sounds exactly like something you wrote alone at 2 in the morning. Sometimes someone has been paying attention to you, long before you knew to look back. If this story moved you, please hit subscribe. Every single story on this channel is crafted to do exactly what this one did, to find the part of you that still believes in something real. Leave a comment and tell us, has someone ever paid attention to you in a way that changed everything? We read every single one. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know who is waiting for exactly this story. Herb the life lesson. The love you've been designing in secret, in sketches and journals and quiet Sunday afternoons, is not a fantasy. It's a blueprint. And somewhere, someone may already be paying attention. We spend our lives planning for everyone else's happiness and forgetting that we, too, were built for something extraordinary. Aida didn't find love by searching for it. She found it by being so completely, authentically herself, in her work, her choices, her single white peony, that the right person recognized her before she recognized him. The lesson is not to wait. The lesson is to be so genuinely yourself that you become findable. To the right person, you already are.